Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I have the Black Locomotive by Rian Hughes, who also authored XX. I did a video about his book XX and sung the high praises out of it because I love that book. And M. Draka LSE commented and said that Hughes already had a follow-up book, Black Locomotive, that came out in 2021. I didn't know that. Like XX just came out really, and it was such a huge, dense, amazing book. I would have thought it'd been another 6 years before Rian Hughes did another book. But when I saw that comment, it was like he's got another one, so I had to go out and get it, and I'm really glad I did. Um, this one of the rare that I'll keep the dust jacket. Maybe not. I don't know. Actually, I'm gonna mail this book to our new buddy Ken Matroni because he really loves trains. So I figured he'd like to read it. But I really like the design. I mean, Rian Hughes is a extremely famous designer, logo designer for comic books. So of course, like both the dust jacket and the actual book itself with this like ribbed thing on it, and the graphics are great. All of the magazine covers, you know, Hughes designed every one of these ones. He's obviously like an absolute scholar of the history of design, history of art. That shows up in his writing in both of the books, is his love for design and art. This book's very much about architecture and architecture as design, and like kind of manipulating the spaces that people live in as a way of manipulating their thoughts. It's a really good book. I really enjoyed it. I will say it's not as much a it's not as formally tricky, and it's not as dense as XX. Like XX really played a lot with typography, and that had a real purpose in the book. Here you get Rian Hughes playing with typography again a little bit, but it's less conceptually important to the story. It has its parts where it matters, but it's more just used to identify different characters. So you have two main characters. One is Austin Arnold, and he's a foreman on like an underground drilling. They're drilling new tunnels under London, and they find a mystery object, and that's what it's mostly about, is this mystery, like gigantic cavernous object that they find. And then there's an artist named Rutherford, I forget his first name, who's there for some kind of unknown reason, but as like a public outreach. They have an artist on board to make sketches and stuff. And the story is mostly about what's going on in this thing that they find underground and they drill into. The visuals that I got reading it were very much like the movie Prometheus, these big kind of alien John Ridley, like, yeah, these big spaceship type of thing buried in the ground. Rian Hughes is very interested in modernism versus postmodernism. I think as philosophies and worldviews that are in competition, and both this book and XX do a really good job putting that to narrative purposes, kind of on a galactic scale. I think XX again had a more of a purpose for the design elements in it and used those to kind of represent the different spots. In this book, there's all of these design elements, like you have just these little samples of different kinds of metals. You have these CAD drawings of different things that are in the book, but they don't feel essential. Like you could take these out. He calls his works a novel graphic instead of a graphic novel because it's more focused on the novel side. But in this one, I really do think for the most part, you could take out all of the graphic elements and you'd still have the same story. Whereas in XX, if you took out the graphic elements, you don't have the story at all. So this book was a little bit disappointing in that it was less playful that way, but I still found the story really compelling. And there was really the kind of peak of the story still has this thing where the typography and the design with the typography becomes important, and it's at the point where Rutherford the artist connects to an intelligence bigger and beyond his similar to what happens in XX, things dealing with larger intelligences. And then the typography and the design really does a great job of implying communication with something bigger than yourself. And the battle that's described between a rational, scientific, like galactic worldview versus these people, this race of people who are able to come in and win by belief, pure belief, and overcoming rationality with like religious belief is a really interesting, like I said, kind of modernism versus postmodernism in narrative form. And I also like that I can't quite tell where Rian Hughes stands on this, you know, whether he's on the postmodern side because a lot of his methods are kind of postmodernist, or if he's on the modernist side. I think he's just interested in the friction between the two idea sets and maybe how they hopefully will be able to coexist with each other. So I don't want to say much more than that, but it's a good follow up to XX. It's definitely not as great of a book. It's still a really compelling narrative. Like I didn't think I was going to have time to finish it so quick, but it sucked me in and kept me reading pretty brisk. It's not like a lot of other experimental books like this where it's really challenging to read. Like it's a real breezy, fun sci-fi read, but you still get kind of these experimental things. I don't know that I would categorize this as a book that could only be a book, whereas XX, the bookness of it kind of matters to the story. This could easily be read digitally, I think, and you could get all of the same content out of it. But really, really great book, really fun book. Enjoyed it. Hardly ever read novels, and anything by Rian Hughes I will absolutely be grabbing. So if I've missed the third Rian Hughes book, let me know, because I wouldn't have known to look for this if it weren't for M. Draka LSE. Yeah, thank you so much for letting me know this existed. Thank you all for following along. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe button and the like button and the bell, and then you get them.